Max Verstappen just closed the gap to pole, and instead of praise, Red Bull triggered an investigation. Second place. Just 1/10 off the fastest lap. After weeks of struggling, they suddenly look fast again. That kind of jump is not normal. Same car, same rules, completely different speed. And here's the part no one can ignore. The performance came from a new rear wing concept, one that changes how the car behaves on the straights. More speed exactly where it matters. Less drag when no one expects it. That's not just clever. That's controversial. Because in Formula 1, when a car behaves differently at high speed, the FIA starts asking questions. Is it legal flexibility? Or something the rules were never meant to allow? And right now, Red Bull is right in the middle of that line. At first, it looked like a simple recovery. Red Bull arrived in Miami after a difficult start to the season, struggling to match the top teams, losing time on the straights, and for the first time in years, chasing instead of leading. Nothing about their recent performance suggested a sudden breakthrough. And that's exactly why what happened in qualifying felt so unusual. Because Verstappen didn't just improve. He transformed the car's biggest weakness into a strength. Second on the grid, just 1/10 away from pole, the closest Red Bull has been all season. That's not a small step. That's a shift in competitive balance. Now here's where it gets interesting. This performance didn't build gradually over several races. It appeared instantly. From one session to the next. And in Formula 1, that kind of immediate change always points to something very specific. Not just setup. Not just confidence. A technical solution. And Red Bull brought exactly that to Miami. A full package of updates, from the front wing to the side pods, all designed to improve airflow and stability. But one element stood out more than anything else. The rear wing. Because this isn't a normal rear wing. At low speed, in corners, it behaves like any other. Stable. Predictable. Within expectations. But at high speed, something changes. The airflow shifts. Drag reduces. Top speed increases exactly where it matters most. Think of it like this. You're running with resistance holding you back, and suddenly, when you sprint, that resistance fades. Not completely. But just enough to make a difference. That's the advantage Red Bull found. And in Miami, with its long straights, that advantage becomes incredibly powerful. Now here's the detail that made other teams react immediately. This concept wasn't invented by Red Bull. It's based on an idea Ferrari introduced earlier. A system designed to optimize straight-line performance by altering how the rear wing interacts with airflow at speed. Red Bull didn't just copy it. They refined it, executed it better. And in doing so, they solved their biggest problem almost overnight. And that's exactly what raises questions. Because when a team gains that much performance, that quickly, using a component that behaves differently depending on speed, it moves into a very specific area of the regulations. The gray area. Where parts are technically fixed, but can still flex under load. Where designs are legal, but only up to a certain limit. And that limit is extremely small. Millimeters. Tiny margins that completely change how the car performs. Now imagine a rear wing that stays within those limits during static tests, but behaves differently at high speed, under real aerodynamic pressure. That's where things get complicated. Because the FIA doesn't just regulate what the car looks like in the garage, they regulate how it behaves on track. And when that behavior changes in a way that creates a clear advantage, it gets attention. Not because it's automatically illegal, but because it might be pushing the rules to their absolute edge. And this is exactly where Red Bull now finds itself. They haven't been accused of breaking the rules, but they've done something just as significant. They've forced the FIA to take a closer look. But this is where everything starts to escalate, beyond performance, into pressure. Because the moment Red Bull showed that level of speed, the reaction wasn't excitement. It was suspicion. Other teams didn't just look at Verstappen's lap time. They looked at how he achieved it, where the car gained speed, how it behaved on the straights, and more importantly, how consistent that behavior was across the lap. Because in Formula 1, rivals don't need proof. They need patterns. Now think about what they saw. A car that used to lose time on long straights, suddenly holding its own. A rear wing that looks stable in slow corners, but more efficient at high speed. And a lap that gains time exactly in the areas where Red Bull was weakest before. That combination doesn't go unnoticed. It never does. So what happens next is almost automatic. Teams start asking questions. Not publicly. Directly to the FIA. They request clarification. They highlight specific behaviors. They point to data. And they ask one simple thing. Is this within the regulations? Now this is where the FIA becomes critical. Because they don't react emotionally. They react technically. They begin analyzing telemetry. speed traces, aerodynamic load simulations. They look at how the rear wing behaves under different forces, at different speeds, under different conditions. Because the rules are very clear about one thing. Aerodynamic components must remain within strict limits of flexibility. They cannot act like moving devices. They cannot adapt dynamically beyond what is allowed. But here's the challenge. Modern Formula One design lives exactly on that edge. Engineers create components that pass every static test, but behave differently when real forces are applied at high speed. That's the gray zone. And that's exactly where Red Bull's solution appears to operate. Now add one more layer. Verstappen himself confirmed something important. He said the car felt much better, especially in that final lap, and that it was the first time this season they were truly fighting at the front. That's not just confidence. That's confirmation of a real performance gain. And when a driver feels that kind of difference instantly, it usually comes from something fundamental. Not small adjustments. A core change in how the car performs. And that's exactly what the FIA is now trying to understand. Because if this system is fully legal, then Red Bull just unlocked a massive advantage. One that could bring them back into the championship fight immediately. But if it crosses even slightly beyond what the rules allow, then the response doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be precise. A clarification. A new test. A tighter limit. And suddenly, that advantage disappears. Almost overnight. So now, everything is building toward a moment that hasn't happened yet. A decision. Not announced with headlines, but felt across the entire grid. Because Miami didn't just show that Red Bull is back. It showed how they came back. And in Formula One, that's always the detail that decides what happens next. And now, everything moves to the most dangerous phase of all. Not development. Not performance. Regulation. Because once the FIA starts looking closely at a concept like this, the story doesn't stay on track. It moves into interpretation. And that's where championships are decided. Right now, Red Bull is in a position that looks strong on the surface, but fragile underneath. They've shown speed. They've shown progress. They've proven the car can fight at the front again. But they've also exposed exactly where that performance comes from. And that's the risk. Because the moment your advantage becomes visible, it becomes vulnerable. Now imagine what happens behind the scenes. Engineers from Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, all studying the same data. All focusing on the same detail. That rear wing behavior at high speed. They don't need to copy it yet. They just need to understand it. And if they can't replicate it immediately, they challenge it. Quietly. Technically. Directly to the FIA. Because in Formula One, you don't always beat your rival on track. Sometimes, you beat them through the rules. Now this is where things become decisive. The FIA doesn't need to accuse Red Bull of doing anything illegal. They just need to ask a different question. Does this design fully respect the intention of the regulations? Because there's a difference. Something can pass every test, and still go against the spirit of what the rules are trying to control. That's the line. And Red Bull is right on it. So what happens next is critical. If the FIA reviews the data and decides everything is compliant, the impact is immediate. Red Bull keeps the advantage. Other teams rush to develop similar concepts. And suddenly, the entire grid shifts toward that philosophy. But if the FIA sees something that doesn't fully align, they don't need penalties. They don't need controversy. They simply adjust the interpretation. A technical directive. A stricter test. A new way of measuring flexibility under load. And just like that, the advantage disappears. No drama. No headlines. Just performance, gone. And this is why Miami feels like a turning point. Because Red Bull didn't just improve. They revealed something. A solution that either becomes the new standard, or gets shut down before it spreads. Now add one final layer. Timing. Because if Red Bull loses this advantage quickly, the entire comeback collapses. They go from second on the grid, back to chasing. Back to searching for answers. Back to the position they were in before Miami. But if they keep it, even for a few races, that's enough. Enough to score points. Enough to build momentum. Enough to re-enter the championship fight. So everything now depends on something we can't see. Not a lap. Not a driver. A decision. One that will be made quietly, but felt everywhere. Because in Formula One, the biggest battles are not always fought wheel to wheel. Sometimes, they're decided in the space between what is allowed, and what is not. And right now, Red Bull is living exactly in that space. Which leads to the final question that defines everything. Did Verstappen's lap prove Red Bull is back for real? Or did it just trigger the moment that takes their advantage away?